William Henry Cosby Jr. was born July 12, 1937, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was one of 4 sons, and he was a natural-born entertainer. According to his friends and family, Bill was the kind of person who loved the spotlight and being in control. It was vitally important to Bill that he be the center of attention, that people looked at him as a great leader and an all-around good guy. He didn't want to fit in, he wanted to stand out, and he spent the majority of his life trying to do so. Every interest and hobby that Bill took part in was somewhat of a contest, by his own admission. If he was going to pursue something, he couldn't just be good at it, he had to be the best. If there was someone in a room that was better than him, that could do something he couldn't or simply was more naturally gifted, Bill would stop at nothing to beat them. This was true of nearly everything he did, save for learning, which he viewed as a waste of time. While in school, Bill would become his class president, which he campaigned for vigorously. Bill would go on to state that he wanted to be president not because he thought he could fix issues within the school or liked student government, but because he saw it as the ultimate popularity contest. Everyone in his class would have to cast a ballot, and everyone would have to write that they liked him over the other students, and that would make him the best. Cosby played nearly every sport he could try out for, and would go on to be the captain of both his basketball and track teams. He remembers the experience fondly in multiple of his biographies, stemming from his apparent belief that being the captain put him above his teammates. Bill just enjoyed being around people and being the head of the group. However, he would eventually have to repeat the 10th grade. While he repeated the 10th grade, Bill felt embarrassed. He had now publicly failed, and his peers couldn't help but notice as he stayed in the grade below them. It was then he made the decision to drop out of school and enlist in the Navy. He would go on to serve as a hospital corpsman at the base in Quantico, Virginia, all while earning his high school diploma through correspondence courses. He thrived in the Navy, once again putting himself in competition with those around him, and moving up the ranks slowly but surely. After 4 years, he left the Navy to attend college at Temple University, and it was there that he began his comedy career. While studying to become a physical therapist, Bill began working as a bartender to pay for school. Every night, he would sling drinks at a Philadelphia club, but as he always did, he turned his job into a competition. As a bartender, he lived and died by his tips, and he noted that some of the other bartenders would get bigger tips than he did. Being the highly competitive man that he was, this was seen as a failure. He had to be the best, and so he began to scope them out, seeing what they would do, and found that the more entertaining they were, the better they would be paid. With that in mind, Bill began his comedy career behind the bar. The more he made them laugh, the more they were inclined to open up their wallets, and every night, he would do the same routine. Bill began to grow somewhat of a reputation. His regulars would come back to see him as often as they could, listening to his comedy stylings nearly every night. Many told Bill that his talents were wasted behind the bar, and that he should pursue comedy full-time. After a little coaxing, Bill decided to pull the trigger, and within 4 years, he would go on to be one of the most famous comedians in the world. But behind the scenes, he was a prolific predator. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading. Today we are going to be covering the case of Bill Cosby, the celebrity who used his reputation as being America's sitcom dad and family-friendly comedian to exploit countless women over the years, and how the people around him tried to keep his crimes quiet. Researching this case was harrowing, as Cosby has written a fair amount of books about his life, his pursuit of women, and virtually everything you can write a book about, and a lot of it looks grim in hindsight. Thankfully, all of his books are available to read for free via the web archive, so no money went into his pocket directly for making the video. This case came once again highly recommended by my subscribers and patrons, and has been one of the most requested videos I've made so far since starting this channel about a year ago. If there is a case you would like to see explored on this channel, let me know by leaving a comment or emailing me at dreading.official@gmail.com. I'm currently still working through and responding to email requests, and I hope, in the new year, to get as many completed as possible. I also want to thank all of you for the patience regarding my uploads, as I have been facing some slight legal issues, as well as some issues with YouTube itself, but hopefully that's all behind us. With all that said, let us begin.
What you have on tonight is wonderful. This is wonderful. And when you walked out, many people became attentive. You make me feel young again. You make me feel very excited.
Imagine a world where you woke up and all the most annoying things you have to deal with day to day are gone. Someone takes care of all those things for you, and you can do whatever you want. Not only that, but when you go outside, people greet you as if you were an old friend. They give you free meals and gifts, and generally revere you. Anything you want, legally or not, is given to you without question. You have all the money you could ever need, and you can do whatever you want at a moment's notice, and no one can say no to you. This is what it used to be like to be famous. Now, in the age of social media, it's different, as one person's negative experience with you specifically can go viral and lead to a lot less work. But that's how it was when Bill Cosby began to gain notoriety. His rise to fame was incredibly swift, as just 2 years after dropping out of college, his comedy stylings were featured on The Tonight Show. This led to a recording contract with Warner Brothers. His comedy was defined by how family-friendly and clean it was. Where other comedians tried to push the line, Cosby played it incredibly safe, sticking to recalling his childhood and odd happenings in his life. This made him incredibly marketable to the general public. His comedy portrayed him as just your average nice guy, who used to get into wacky shenanigans, and was inoffensive to most everyone. It also tapped into a previously unheard of market for comedians, that being kids and teenagers. Because Cosby talked about his childhood in Philadelphia and some of the wacky hijinks he got into, teens felt understood in a way that they previously hadn't. Cosby spoke to the youth of the generation, and his comedy was one of the only times they were talked to in the media without being talked down to. It was also notable that Cosby's comedy seemed to transcend race, which was incredibly notable at the time. Cosby made it a point to never talk about his race or political issues in his comedy. This drew ire from fellow comedians, who felt as if, with his rising success, he should be speaking out on political issues to evoke change. When asked about his derision, Cosby stated, "I'm tired of those people who say you should be doing more to help your people. I'm a comedian, that's all. My humor comes from the way I look at things. I am a man. I see things the way other people do. A white person listens to my act and he laughs and thinks, yeah, that's the way I see it too. Okay, that must mean we're all alike, right? So I figure this way I'm doing as much good for race relations as the next guy." As Bill's star continued to rise, he was offered multiple show and movie opportunities, most of which he turned down. If the part had racial jokes, or if the focus of the part was on race, Bill would reject the offer outright, finding it to be offensive and inappropriate. In interviews, he said, "If somebody comes to me and says, I want to have you on the show because there's this thing I have about a white guy, and my answer is no. You need a show Negro. Now if you need a comedian, give me a call." It wouldn't be until 1965 that Cosby would get his first television series. I Spy was an American secret agent adventure television series that ran for 3 seasons on NBC from 1965 to 1968. The show's premise was U.S. intelligence agents Kelly Robinson, played by Robert Culp, and Alexander Scotty Scott, played by Cosby, traveling undercover, chasing villains, spies, and beautiful women. The show broke barriers, being the first weekly dramatic television series to feature an African American in the starring role. Because of this, 4 states declined to air the show, but that did little to stop his success. He would win 3 Emmys for playing Scotty, and continue to tour as a stand-up comedian, recording 6 albums worth of material. Everything Bill touched seemed to turn to gold. He recorded a music album, made multiple movies and documentaries, and created the cartoon Fat Albert. But it wouldn't be until 1984 when Cosby cemented himself as a cultural icon with the creation of The Cosby Show. Cosby played Cliff Huxtable, a successful father who was raising 5 children alongside his wife, Claire. The show was mostly based around Cosby's life, and large bits of it were taken from his comedy specials. The show was a smash hit and stayed on the top of ratings during its 8-season run. The show, like the majority of Cosby's career, was meant to make people feel good. It rarely delved into harsh topics, focusing on a loving family and providing good, clean humor for the viewers. Cosby's portrayal of Cliff was in line with how he had always portrayed himself, and every week, the nation tuned in to watch him being a loving and attentive father. He quickly became known as America's dad to most, and many would refer to him as a second father figure, and he would use his reputation for being a nice and loving person to sexually exploit countless women. This portion of the video includes victim statements about what occurred and can be upsetting to most listeners. If you are not in a place to take on this information, I would recommend clicking off of this video entirely and watching something else. I will give you a moment to do so. Please take care of your mental well-being. In 1965, when Cosby was playing Scotty in I Spy and winning Emmys, he would also begin assaulting women by drugging them and then raping them while they were unconscious. The first reported victim was Christina Rulli, who worked as a secretary at the Artist Agency Corporation. According to Christina, Cosby had come in to talk to a lawyer about a contract that he was being offered, and while there, he made time to see the secretaries. It was a prerequisite for the job that the secretaries be attractive. So when the talent came in, they often invited the girls to parties, dinners, and large events. Cosby invited Christina to his home for a party, telling her that the event was an after-party for a comedy show he was doing at the Hollywood Palace. Christina agreed to attend, but when she arrived at his home, she was shocked to find that no one else was there. Bill ushered her inside and told her that his wife, Camille, is out of town and he had been left with the kids. Bill offered her a drink, a bourbon and 7, and took her around the house, stopping in to check on his kids multiple times. However, after the second drink, the world went blank. In an interview with Philly Mag, she recalled coming to and being in his pool. She had no recollection of how she got there, but she was walking around in the pool, fully dressed. She stated, "I ended up in the pool, and well, I was in quite a foggy state. I have vague memories of someone walking next to me at the pool. And the next day, I realized that the bottoms of my nylons were completely tore up. Not just a run, but tore up. So I must have been walking around the pool for quite a while." In her altered state, Cosby was able to move her from the pool into the bed. She recalled, "It was all foggy, and I woke up in the bed. I found myself on the bed, and he had his shirt off. He had unzipped his pants. I was just coming to. He was attempting to force me into oral sex. He had his hand on my head, he had his cock out, and he had my head pushed close enough to it. I just remember looking at his stomach hair and the hair on his chest, and it never went past that. I immediately came to and was immediately very sick. I pushed myself away and ran to the bathroom and threw up. I was feeling really ill, and I never got sick like that from alcohol. At least, not that small of an amount." When Christina went into work the next day, she would ask the other secretaries why they didn't come to the party, and none of them would give her a straight answer. It seemed, at least in her interpretation, they had already been made aware of what going to a Cosby party meant, and no one had warned her previously. Christina didn't come forward with what had happened until much later, embarrassed that she had been taken advantage of. However, she did tell multiple people in her life about the assault, who would go on to corroborate her story, but she was far from the only woman to be abused in this way. In 1966, Carla Ferrigno was invited to dinner with Cosby, his wife, and another man. Carla had assumed it was a double date between this man and the Cosbys, but would later find out that that wasn't the case. Throughout the night, Cosby offered Carla drinks and drugs, which Carla rebuffed as she was sober. The foursome would then go to Cosby's home, where Camille went to bed early, leaving Carla alone with the two men. After a while, her date disappeared, and she was left alone with the famed comedian. Still, she felt safe, as she was in his home, with his wife right in the other room. But that wasn't the case. Carla stated he grabbed her and began to grope her. She pushed him off, telling him she wasn't interested, but he continued to push himself on top of her. She struggled with him for a while and ran out of the room, looking for some help. She found her date wandering the house, and she demanded he take her home. Shortly after this assault, Cosby's wife Camille and their kids would move out of California to Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts. The Cosbys told the press that they wanted to shield their children from the toxic Hollywood culture and allow them to grow up in a healthy environment. But Bill would still live in Hollywood and promised he'd travel to see his family as often as his schedule allowed. In 1969, teenage comedy writer Joan Tarshis was invited by Cosby to his Hollywood bungalow to help him write a new comedy monologue. Despite being only 19, Joan had worked with other celebrity comedians and was excited for the opportunity. She would go on to express that being asked to work with Cosby was like taking an express elevator to the penthouse without having to stop on the upper floors, and she felt honored. He plied her with alcohol, then invited her to the set of his newest show, where he told her about all the things he was going to do soon, implying that she would be working alongside him. They then went back to his bungalow to work on some earthquake-related jokes. However, when they got back, everything changed. Cosby made Joan another drink, and she passed out. In the interview with the Washington Post, she stated, "I don't know what was in that drink, but it knocked me out. The next thing I remember, after having that drink, was waking up on his couch. I was really foggy. He was trying to take my underwear off. Terrified about what was happening, but not wanting to offend Cosby, Joan, still drugged, tried to convince Cosby not to take things any further. She told the comedian that she had an STD, and that if he had sex with her, his wife would get it and know he had cheated, but he didn't care. Quote, he didn't miss a beat. He knew exactly how to respond. After he had assaulted Joan, she went back home to Brooklyn. Like Christina, she felt ashamed of what had happened. Cosby was famous and known for being a good guy, and she felt as if no one would believe what happened to her. However, a few weeks later, Cosby would end up re-entering her life. He called her home and spoke with her mother, who at this point knew nothing of the assault. He told her mother that he wanted her to come see him perform at the Westbury Music Fair, as she helped him write his monologue. Her mom immediately agreed, and Joan couldn't think think of a way to tell her mom that she didn't want to go without telling her she had been assaulted. Joan would go on to say, quote, I didn't know how to handle it. I thought, okay, I'm going to be in a theater, it's going to be safe. I didn't see a way out. But she wasn't. Cosby picked her up in a limo, and before they arrived at the festival, she had already been drugged. Joan stated she asked the limo driver to take her back to the car to lay down. But when she came to, she was in a hotel room, naked. She had no memory of getting there or what had happened, but she knew she had been assaulted. That same year, Linda Traits would also be assaulted by Cosby. Linda had just graduated high school when she moved out of California. She was hired to work as a waitress at the Café Figaro, a notable West Hollywood establishment which Cosby co-owned. He frequently used the restaurant as a backdrop for his business meetings and was known to chat up the young girls who worked there, much like the secretaries that worked at the artist agency. He was clear that only beautiful girls should be hired to work at Café Figaro. Traits was starstruck by Cosby, and when he offered her a ride home after, she agreed. Again, Cosby had sold himself to American teens as being the loving, devoted husband to his wife Camille, and being an all-around good person. The thought that he would use this car ride to hurt Linda had never even occurred to her. Instead of taking Linda directly to her home, he suggested that they drive to the beach and hang out a little bit. Linda agreed, but once there, he pulled out a briefcase full of pills. Linda would state he had assorted sections in it, with pills and tablets in it, different colors arranged and assorted into compartments. He offered me pills and said it would help me relax, and I kept refusing, but he kept offering. When she wouldn't take any of the pills, Cosby tried to assault her. He pushed himself on top of her, lunging from the driver's seat of the car towards the passenger seat. He grabbed her chest, groping her, and tried to push her down. Linda screamed, horrified at what he was doing. She used all of her force to push him off of her, and threw herself out of the car. She sprinted down the beach, crying, but tripped on her long skirt, ripping it and falling to the ground. Cosby had chased her down the beach, not wanting her to attract police or public attention. He calmed her down, telling her he would take her home, and eventually coerced her into getting back into the car. He bought her a new skirt to replace the one that had ripped, and drove her home without speaking to her. Though Linda didn't go to the police, she did tell everyone in her life about what had happened. She informed coworkers, telling them if Cosby offered to give them a ride home, to just say no. She told her friends, urging them to never go to the Café Figaro. And she told her family. Later on, when she was asked why she didn't go to the police if she told everyone about what had happened, her brother Jim stated, quote, it was a different time. We all also knew this was a really big guy with a big PR operation and lawyers, and that he could crush us, that he would crush us, and her. And he was right. Again, by this point, rumors had already begun to spread around Hollywood that Cosby wasn't as good of a guy as he portrayed, but he was successful and money could buy a lot. It wasn't hard to keep bad press out of the tabloids. In those early days of media, if a story were coming out about Cosby, even implying wrongdoing on his part, unprofessional behavior, and the like, he would call the paper and kill the story right then. He would give them another exclusive, usually an interview about a new project he was working on, and they would drop the story entirely. According to former NBC employee Frank Scotti, he was aware of the allegations against Cosby long before they dropped. He told New York Daily News that he paid off 8 women for Cosby, sending them thousands to keep them quiet. Had those women come forward, they wouldn't have been listened to. In 1970, Cosby would go on to assault former Playboy playmate Victoria Valentino. She had been introduced to Cosby by her friend, Francesca Emerson. Bill had been extremely kind to Emerson and asked her to audition for multiple shows he took part in. He had never tried anything with her, and she felt safe with him. But with Victoria, it was a different story. Victoria met Cosby at Café Figaro, and the pair hit it off. He presented himself the same way that he had on film, kind, courteous, and nothing if not nice. However, a few weeks later, when Victoria and her roommate, Meg Foster, went to Café Figaro for dinner, they ran into Cosby once more. He sat them down and talked to them for a while, and then, when Victoria mentioned that she had recently been depressed, he gave the woman a couple of pills. Victoria and Meg had no idea what the pills were, but Cosby eased their tensions by saying that they would make them all feel better, and seemingly took one himself. Within moments, both women felt as if they couldn't function. They weren't able to speak, with Victoria feeling as if she was extremely drunk. Cosby told the girls he would drive them home, but after getting some of the staff to help bring the girls to his car, he drove them to an apartment he had in the area. Once inside, Foster passed out while Valentino felt as if she was going to be sick. She tried to get herself to the bathroom before anything happened. but when she returned, she saw that Cosby was near Meg's unconscious body and clearly had an erection. Valentino immediately understood what was happening, but was still inebriated. She tried to distract Cosby from her roommate, telling him to stop and leave her alone. Cosby then set his sights on her. After he finished, he told her to call a cab when she wanted to leave, and exited the apartment. Like the other women, Valentino kept the instance to herself. She had already been going through a major depressive episode and didn't want the continued scrutiny in her life. However, in 1996, Valentino gave an interview with fellow Playboy playmate Charlotte Kemp for the book she was writing, Centerfold Memories. The book was set to be about what it was really like to be a playmate and how dark it could be. In the interview, Valentino talked about how Cosby had assaulted her and Meg. The same year, Cosby would assault Tamara Green. Tamara was working as a model and a singer in Los Angeles when she met Cosby. She thought he seemed like a fun guy. She was careful not to spend too much time with him though, as celebrity men usually had a large entourage of women that they traveled with, and she didn't want to be thought of that way. Eventually, Cosby hired her to help him raise money from investors for a club he was hoping to open. One day while working, she called Cosby to tell him that she wasn't feeling well and was going to go home to rest. Despite the fact that she had symptoms of a head cold, Cosby told her that she simply needed to eat something and invited her to lunch with him at Cafe Figaro. Once there, he gave her some red and gray pills and told her they were over-the-counter decongestants. At this point, she had known Cosby for years and thought of him as just a nice, albeit egotistical guy. She took the pills and within moments, she felt wrong. After lunch, he took her back to her home, stripped her, and began to sexually assault her. She screamed at him, trying to get him to stop, but he continued. As he continued, she somehow was able to regain control of her body and grabbed a table side lamp to defend herself. In 1971, while waiting to appear as a guest on The Tonight Show, Cosby forced One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest actress Louisa Moritz to perform oral sex on him. As stated previously, people in and surrounding the industry knew about Cosby. Those furthest away from the industry would hear vague rumors. Worse for wear, there would be someone who knows someone else that Bill once knew, and who was inevitably abused by him. But no one knew for sure. People closer to him would say he was a playboy and would cheat on his wife. Sure, but he was an incredibly famous man. Why would he need to drug women? But the people who worked closest to him, the ones who he trusted, were fully aware of what he was doing. One of these people was Joe Farrell, a talent agent who would make or break a star's career. Joe scouted two women who would go on to be sexually assaulted by Bill, but would deny any responsibility, stating that the assertion of any wrongdoing on her part was mind-boggling. According to Barbara Bowman, Joe Farrell introduced her to Cosby when she was 17. Joe took her to a comedy club to perform for Cosby and show him if she had star potential. She prepared a monologue and an entire routine, with the idea that if she did really well, she would get a role in one of his upcoming projects. Cosby stated that he was wowed by her, and that her star was on the rise. He advised her to move to New York to get more opportunities, and while in New York, he brought her to the set of The Cosby Show. In New York, she was isolated from friends and family. Eventually, everything she did was run through Cosby and Farrell. And it was then that Cosby began to assault her. On one occasion, Bowman passed out after one glass of wine, only to wake up wearing nothing but her underpants and his shirt. She had no memory of what occurred. On another occasion, he pinned her down on a hotel bed and tried to assault her. However, without drugs in her system, she fought back until eventually he got tired. After successfully fighting him off once, he told her to go back home to Denver and that he was done with her. Joe would then go on to introduce Beth Ferrier to Cosby. Bill and Beth would begin to carry out a brief affair, with Bill promising to help the career of the aspiring model. The fling didn't last long, as Cosby was still married to Camille and carrying out an affair with another woman. But after a couple of months apart, Bill would meet back up with his ex. According to Beth, he was performing at a comedy club in her area and had invited her to come see him. When she arrived, he was as kind as ever and had gotten her a coffee. He claimed he wanted to catch up with her, but she blacked out, waking up in the back of her car hours later alone. I woke up and I was in the back of my car all alone. My clothes were a mess. My bra was undone. My top was untucked, and I'm sitting there going, oh my god, where am I? What's going on? I was so out of it, it was just awful. Cosby sent a security guard over to the vehicle after he had finished, tasked with getting her home safely, but Beth felt violated. She confronted him about the assault at his hotel later on. and he claimed that she had simply had too much to drink, even though all she had drunk that night was the coffee he had given her. In 1981, Bill would go on to try and assault supermodel Janice Dickinson. In the original copy of her memoir, Janice described the assault in detail, writing that Cosby had lured her into having lunch with him under the guise of wanting to make a television show following her life and career. But the two weren't alone for lunch, as Cosby had invited another actor, Terry Savalas, to join them. Cosby sold Janice on being more than a model, and like he had with nearly every one of the girls he had assaulted, told her she just needed him to mentor her. She wrote, "Before I left, Cosby asked me to do two things for him. First, he wanted me to read An Actor Prepares by Stanislavski. Next, and far more important, he wondered if I would be good enough to give him my home phone number. I spent the following day devouring An Actor Prepares and beginning, unfortunately, to take myself oh so seriously. So I was plenty prepared by the time Cosby called. Again, he told me how beautiful I was, how powerfully I had affected him, and how much he wanted to see me again. He bombarded the young model with praise, setting her up with a musical director to make her a singer. He told her he wanted her to open for him in Vegas, to go on the road with him, and that he saw her as the next big thing. At the time, Janice was dealing with dependency issues and was in and out of rehabs. Cosby didn't seem to mind. He actively plied her with alcohol and drugs when they were together. After one stint in rehab, Cosby brought Janice to Lake Tahoe. He told her he wanted her to open for him, but while out to dinner, he gave her a red pill along with wine. The following is her recollection of events, as given in 2014.
In 1982, I was on a job in Bali, in Indonesia, and he called, and the conversation was, the best of my recollection, you need to get to Lake Tahoe because I'll be performing there, and I want to offer you that job we talked about, as well as helping you with a singing career I hear you're trying to do. When I arrived in Lake Tahoe, Bill was performing at the venue, and then after dinner, in my room, he had given me wine and a pill. The next morning I woke up and I wasn't wearing my pajamas, and I remember before I passed out that I had been sexually assaulted by this man.
You took the pill, you drank the alcohol.
Red wine.
Red wine, and then what happened?
Before I woke up in the morning, the last thing I remember was Bill Cosby in a patchwork robe, dropping his robe and getting on top of me.
Did you ever confront him about what you thought might have happened?
No.
Did he ever say anything to you about what might have happened?
No.
So you come forward now to talk about this again. Does it
I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
I'm doing this. It's because it's the right thing to do, and it happened to me, and this is the true story.
Though Cosby tried to keep his reputation as sanitized as possible, rumors of his behavior had begun to grow past idle gossip. He had assaulted enough people that it seemed that everyone in the entertainment industry knew someone who knew someone else who had been assaulted by him, and young women were being advised against spending time alone with him. With more independent reporters being able to write what they want, and with the internet being so easily accessible, stories that had been pushed down by Cosby and his team found legs. In 1990, the National Enquirer ran a story about the various stories of sexual assault surrounding Cosby, and, according to Wendy Williams, gave the tabloid an entire interview denouncing the claims. Upon discovering this interview, Wendy discussed the claims on her morning show, but halfway through, she was called into her manager's office. On February 1, 2000, the first criminal complaint would be filed against Cosby. 20-year-old Lachelle Covington had been invited over to the Cosby home in the same manner that the other women in the past had been. He claimed that he wanted to help her career and that the dinner was strictly professional. However, dinner quickly turned, and Lachelle found herself being groped by America's dad. He molested her, but she fought back, repeatedly telling him no and attempting to get as far from him as possible. After a while, Cosby got annoyed at Lachelle, and she left, feeling violated and disgusted with the sitcom star. After 4 days and talking to her family, she went to the police. Cosby admitted that he had had dinner with Lachelle, but after that, she went home. He implied that Lachelle and her family were trying to extort him, although proof of that did not exist. After a brief investigation, the police referred the complaint to the district attorney, who declined to prosecute, stating that there was simply nothing there. The next time Cosby would speak to the police would be in 2005, when Andrea Constant, the operations director of the women's basketball team at Temple University, would contact the police over an incident a year prior. Andrea had been friends with Cosby for nearly 3 years and had turned to him for career advice. He invited her over to his home to discuss leaving the university for greener pastures, but when she arrived, he offered her 3 blue pills. He claimed they were herbal anxiety medications and that he took them all the time. Trusting her longtime friend, she took the pills. When the drugs began to take effect, Cosby led her to his couch, where he sexually assaulted her. Constant left her job and moved back to Canada, needing to get distance from where she had been violated. A year after the event, she filed a police report against the aging actor, but as there was little to go off of, the case would later be dropped by the prosecution. Bruce Castor, the district attorney who made the decision not to prosecute, would put out a press release, stating that while he fully believed that Cosby had assaulted Andrea, there simply wasn't concrete evidence to successfully charge the comedian in a court of law. But Andrea wouldn't accept that, based on how seamlessly Cosby had assaulted her, that she was not the only person he had done this to. She filed a civil lawsuit against him for the assault, and 13 other women came forward, mostly anonymously, with their own stories of assault. Cosby would later settle the case for $3.38 million, while simultaneously declaring his innocence. However, the exact amount would not become public until much later. Surprisingly, despite the public nature of the suit, very few people seemed to know or care about it. Networks were still airing Cosby's shows and specials, and though he was no longer as active in his career as he had been, he was still known as America's dad, and an all-around good guy. It wouldn't be until 2014, when comedian Hannibal Buress's act was recorded, that the public became aware of what Cosby had done. Hannibal had spoken about Cosby in his act before, calling him out for being smug and condescending towards people, all the while being a rapist. However, in 2014, while performing in Philadelphia, an audience member brought out their phone and recorded his statements.
Has the fucking smuggest old black man public persona that I hate. This kid's on TV. Pull your pants up, black people. I was on TV in the 80s. I can talk down to you because I had a successful sitcom. Yeah, it was great women, Bill Cosby, so kind of brings you down a couple notches. I don't curse on stage, but yeah, you're a rapist, so it'll take you saying lots of motherfuckers on Bill Cosby himself if you weren't a rapist. For the most part, it's fucking public Teflon image. I've done this bit on stage, and people don't believe. People think I'm making it up. I'm like, Bill Cosby, there's a lot of rape allegations. No, you devil. That shit is upsetting. If you didn't know about it, trust me. When you leave here, Google Bill Cosby rape. It's not funny. That shit has more.
The video was posted on YouTube, where it immediately went viral. It spread to every social media, and eventually mainstream outlets who hadn't reported on the lawsuit jumped on the story as if it was new. Cosby, however, tried to operate as usual. The allegations and claims weren't new, and after being in the business for more than half of his life, he seemed to figure that ignoring it would be the best option. After nearly a month of silence on social media, he posted a photo of himself to Twitter with the caption, "Go ahead, meme me." The tweet was bombarded with references to the accusations, and eventually was deleted. He would go on to be interviewed by Entertainment Tonight, hoping to squash the allegations by promoting other projects he was working on. His wife Camille stood by him, stating that she loved her husband and he would in no way do the things he's being accused of. In the interview, Cosby was asked about the allegations, but he declined to give comment. He also went so far as to try to tell the reporter to edit out any discussion of the topic, claiming that it would be wise for him to do so if he wanted to continue working in the industry. Entertainment Tonight later aired the vague threat.
No, we don't answer that.
Okay. I just wanted to ask if you wanted to respond at all about whether any of that was true.
There's no response.
It was a little nerve-wracking to pose this question to him, I'll admit that.
The persona that people know about Bill Cosby, should they believe anything differently about what?
There is no comment about that.
The AP has released new excerpts from its interview with Bill Cosby and his wife shot 2 weeks ago. The comedian seems to bully the reporter not to air the exchange.
I think if you want to consider yourself to be serious, that it will not appear anywhere.
We took a look again at our interview, the full tape, and we felt like it was much more relevant now because the story had evolved so much.
And I would appreciate it if it was scuttled.
The AP released the interview just hours before the New York Daily News declared It's time for America's Dad to Talk.
Despite the allegations, multiple celebrities stood by Cosby, stating that the women who had come forward over the years were opportunistic liars. However, as time went on, more information would come out showing just how despicable Cosby was, leaving many to believe that he is one of the most prolific predators alive. In 2015, some of the court records from Andrea Constand's 2005 civil suit against Cosby were unsealed and released to the public. After the lawsuit ended, Constand had signed a non-disclosure agreement stating that the court records would remain sealed as long as Cosby never spoke about the claims. However, his response to the new allegations violated the agreement, meaning that the record could be released to the public. Parts of the records that were released included the full transcript of his deposition, and the contents of it were horrifying. Cosby had been adamant, when questioned, that every single one of the accusations against him was false, and that he had never drugged and sexually abused any woman. In public, he admitted that for a short while, he had engaged in playboy behaviors and had broken his vows to his wife, which she had forgiven him for, but was otherwise a good man. However, the deposition told a different story. In his testimony, Cosby admitted to nearly everything he was accused of, but claimed everything he did was consensual. Somehow, he admitted to giving women he slept with drugs, specifically Quaaludes, that he had been given for back pain. Then, when they were under the influence and couldn't consent to sexual activity, assaulting them. He clarified that he had never taken the Quaaludes, as they were depressants and made him feel out of control, but he saw no issue with giving multiple women the drugs before abusing them. He didn't seem to understand that purposely putting these women in an altered state, where they would lose control of their bodies, was a bad thing, but did understand that he wouldn't want it to happen to him. He admitted to getting them to come over to his home under false pretenses, pretending to care about their lives and careers, just to get them alone, and he admitted to paying these women thousands of dollars in hush money, routing the money through various agencies to keep his wife in the dark. The entire deposition is linked in the description box down below, if you would like to read the entire document. Later that same year, Cosby would file 8 defamation suits against some of his accusers, stating that they were outright lies. The choice to only sue 8 of the then 50 women who would come forward at the time struck most people as odd. Some speculated that this was an admittance by Cosby that the other 42 allegations were truthful, but once again, things would take a turn. On December 30th, 2015, 11 years after Cosby raped Constand, 10 years after the district attorney told her they weren't going to pursue charges against the comedian, Cosby was formally charged with drugging and raping her, and in response, Cosby's lawyers claimed that the accusations leveled against him are the product of racism. His lawyers claimed that Cosby partook in consensual, casual sex outside of his marriage, but because the majority of his accusers were white women, he was the victim of a racist sex war. Mr. Cosby is no stranger to discrimination and racial hatred. When the media repeats her accusations with no evidence, no trial, and no jury, we are moved backwards as a country and away from the America that our civil rights leaders sacrificed so much to create. The trial against Cosby began June 5, 2017, but ultimately resulted in a mistrial after 6 days of deliberation. Former jurors would come out to claim that the deliberation became incredibly contentious, with verbal altercations nearly turning into physical ones. It would take another year for the case to go to trial, at which point nearly every member of Cosby's legal team had left. April 2, 2018, Cosby's second trial would begin, and his new legal team set out to discredit every woman who would come forward. They called Andrea Constand a con artist, who saw Bill as an easy way to make money. They claimed she had expressed interest in Bill prior to coming over that day, and despite him admitting to giving her drugs, the sex had been consensual. In their closing arguments, Cosby's lawyers claimed the accusations against him were racist, that the women who were speaking out were all seeking their 15 minutes of fame, and that there was no substantial evidence to prove he had ever laid a hand on any one of them. This was, of course, if you forget the fact that these women had come forward anonymously years earlier, and that he admitted to drugging the women in order to sleep with them in his deposition. In rebuttal, the prosecution repeated that Cosby was a con man who had used the idealized image of Cliff Huxtable to serve as a shield from his true self. Oddly enough, this caused Cosby to begin to laugh in the courtroom. Unlike the previous trial, the jury only took 2 days to come back to a consensus. On April 26, 2018, 14 years after Cosby had assaulted Constand, he was convicted on 3 felony counts of aggravated indecent assault. Cosby would be sentenced to a term of 3 to 10 years in state prison. However, 3 years after conviction, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court would rule to overturn the guilty verdict. The decision was made partially because the Supreme Court believed that when Montgomery County District Attorney Bruce Castor Jr. stated that there was not enough evidence to to prosecute, and Andrea had taken the matter to civil court, they had agreed to not pursue the case any further. By putting out a press release stating that they could not move forward, Castor was saying the case should never be tried. However, when a new district attorney reversed that decision and chose to charge Cosby, that was entirely unlawful. They said, "We hold that when a prosecutor makes an unconditional promise of non-prosecution, and when the defendant relies upon that guarantee to the detriment of his constitutional right not to testify, the principle of fundamental fairness that undergirds due process of law in our criminal justice system demands that the promise be enforced." After being released, Bill tweeted, "I have never changed my stance nor my story. I have always maintained my innocence. Thank you to all my fans, supporters, and friends who stood by me through this ordeal. Special thanks to Pennsylvania Supreme Court for upholding the rules of law." As of today, Bill Cosby has announced that he plans to tour in 2023. However, his legal issues are far from over. In December of 2022, 6 more women filed a civil suit against Cosby, claiming that he sexually abused and assaulted them, and more accusations against him have come out. Bill Cosby spent decades in the spotlight, being sheltered by any kind of criticism by his squeaky clean image. His children's shows, comedy career, and family-first persona were carefully formulated to make him seem harmless, but he was anything but. If you have made it to this part in the video, thank you for watching, and consider leaving a like or a comment. If there is a case you would like to see covered, let me know. Have a great day, and remember to stay safe.